All right, everybody, welcome to week 2. I feel like I should get like a catchphrase every week when we start the class, like "Howdy ho" or something like that, just sort of to, like, it can't just be like "Hello and welcome to week 2." Be something more.
It's always been like that.
I know. Maybe that should be my legacy. Okay, can everybody see my screen share? I'm just going to say yes, no. So no, sometimes it doesn't. They say it's sharing, but it's not sharing. Yes, thanks, Dave. All right, so this weekend was the first review quiz. Didn't go great. So the average was 51.43%. 21 people wrote. One person actually got 100%. So it was difficult, I have to admit. It was the first exam. The topics seems introductory, but they weren't. Like I mentioned in the class, there's a lot of stuff around the deployments and that for the persistence unit in that first topic, although they don't specifically say it, it's going to be asked. So each week we go and actually look at the bottom 3 questions to see sort of what went wrong there. Is anything specific? So we can see the bottom 3 questions are really the bottom 3 questions. There was a 0% question, but that's because Rory had the one question wrong. So you guys can blame question 5. Because I looked at them like 0%.
I don't make these questions.
Oh yeah, that one wasn't correctly formatted.
I did this in Microsoft Edge, which might have been a problem.
All right, so let's look at question 7, which is the lowest of the low.
I think that's inspired.
All right, so this first question is looking at, and this was actually a trick question. This is one of those classic Oracle let's catch you out type of questions. And it is looking at your little blad there with your classes and your persistence XML and ORM XML. They're sort of asking which ones are going to always be examined. So the thing is always is the term there. So in your persistence XML, you can actually go and define that your annotation shouldn't be read. So that your persistence unit shouldn't go and look at your classes, just look at your persistence XML and your ORM XML. So the only thing that you can guarantee always is that your persistence XML and any mapping XMLs like ORM XML is going to be read. That's the only thing. So this was a bit of a trick one. People got it right, not everybody, but this is sort of one of those. I think this is one of the exceptions. Not all the questions are going to be like that, but the big thing is it will always be examined. And always there's the catch. It's tricksy.
Should have put it in bold.
Yeah, it is very tricksy. Like, I mean, this caught me out. I was like, so sure, yeah, it'll be that, but then it didn't work. So that was sort of the trick. Then I'm not surprised that a lot of people got that wrong. Then I said sort of it's this XML mapping metadata complete. If you actually put that in your persistence unit, it doesn't even look at your annotated classes. So the next one is question 1, and the rest of the questions are all about the packaging and scoping. So question 1, so this one you can see it's nicely formatted. So any of these questions...
I've got Windows 10, man. You know how difficult. There's no IE, there's no, and Chrome doesn't work.
What happened? I want to work on Windows XP. What's this Windows 10? I want to work on XP. So, on this specific question, and most of the deployment questions is going to be like this. You're going to need to look at the actual scoping of your persistence unit. So you can see this is an EAR file. You've got a WAR file and a normal jar in there. The persistence unit is in your meta-INF here for your WAR file. So its persistence root is your WAR file, and your forum EJB it's in the meta. So its persistent unit is in the jar. But the main thing is this jar file isn't in the EAR's lib folder. So it's not visible to anything else. So you can put it in there. It's not going to do much, but it can be in there. So the scope for these two is that they can't see each other and that nothing else in the EAR can actually use the one at the bottom. So going through the process of elimination, the class and the forum defined can see each other. No, they can't. The EAR is valid classes defined and no cannot access the other one. So it's the second one here is that the one can't see the other one. And that's just because this jar file isn't in the lib folder. then the other one was, what was it, 2? Yeah, question 2. And this is the one which wasn't lacquer formatted. So this, at the top, it should actually be like all, like a little arrowhead going in. So it's pretty much the same as the first question. The big difference here is that this jar file is now in the lib folder of the ear. So it can actually be seen by the other modules in your ear file. So this one will be whatever one says it can see the other one. The class isn't defined, so it should be the bottom one there. Using that little funny way to actually access the persistence unit in the other jar file. So this is just something that you should just know. There's no trick to it, just know it. So what, and I can't really see them in the certification exam giving you just a WAR file and asking listener what else can see it. The WAR file will probably put the persistent unit XML in some weird directory in the wrong place, which means it's not going to work. So just be aware of that. And with the ear files, if it's not in the lib folder, nothing else can see it. That should be it. So there's a few rules there that you're just going to need to know. And that's it. So I don't know if there's any questions about that before we start with the real class, with the real work. So this weekend's review quiz will be a bit easier. Won't be easy, but it will be easier, I think, than this last week.
All the easy questions in the question bank. Sorted by.
Dude, like, I mean, like, I do the review quizzes just to see that how I prepared for the class as well. And I did that first with the first week's review quiz, and I think I got 0. No, I didn't get 0, but I didn't get 100%. But it was very difficult. This next week is a bit easier, but these first 2 weeks there was actually quite a lot of reading to do. That's just because the topic looks small, but it's actually covering a lot. Where the coming weeks doesn't look like there's that much reading. There might be some weeks where there might be half a chapter you need to read, so that will be a bit easier. So just be aware that there's probably a lot of reading for this week's review quiz. Don't leave it until Sunday afternoon when you want to write. Then you want to start reading because you're going to struggle. And I think it also sort of gave people a taste that this isn't going to be an easy certification. The passing mark for it is 61% for a reason. It's not because it's easy, it's because it's difficult. So I hope that sort of some people sort of realize that it's.
They realized after I enrolled it.
Yeah, so don't get disheartened. I mean, the thing about this is you're not going to do the first week and then know everything about JPA. And a lot of these questions, although they're specific about a topic, they sometimes include things about other topics. And unfortunately, we can't just do questions that just focus on this week's topics. Otherwise, we'll have 5 questions in there. Some of the questions are mixed. So if you didn't do great in this week's review quiz, don't worry about it. Remember, one of the outcomes of this course is that you learn more about JPA, not that you get 100% for every review quiz. So that's not the reason for doing this. So this week's topic, we're looking at the API entities. So actually, last week we did a little bit of introduction to entities. This week's actually going to look at more details about entities. And once again, these topics, like the second topic from last week, is, I think, based on the actual Oracle course instead of the specification. So we're answering 2 questions. Like Rory says, it'll be like sales speak, like, what are you going to get out of this course? You're going to learn the difference between objects and entities. Yay! The difference between persistent fields and properties.
And you could choose between one thing from getting certification, either an increase or more roles and responsibilities, or just knowledge.
Yeah, so I think the topic is a bit misleading. If you go and look at the certification, the specification itself, there's a lot more to these than I've got there. So we're going to look back quickly at entities. Persistent fields and properties, actually look at the access modes there, and then we're going to look at some of the API annotations. It's not just the 4 they've got there. There's a lot more. We're going to look at those. So we're actually going to fall away with a demo today. Just to sort of get you guys going, sort of what I use to just get the JPA stuff going and working. And I'm going to use this demo application sort of through the rest of the session just to sort of show things. So the entities, there's a lot of flashes and bangs and things that happen on the screen when you do the JPA stuff, especially with entities, so I'm not going to run much. So I like to use Maven. So Maven for the win, yay. And there's a nice archetype that you can use. It actually sets up with Eclipse Link, Mavenized, all that. And if you want to switch to using Derby, so if you want to switch to Hibernate or MySQL or something, it's quite easy to go and change it. You just go and change your POM file, and it's ready to go. So I'm going to do this on the fly again. Let's see if it's...
Nothing wrong can happen.
Nothing can go wrong. So I'm going to tell Maven to go and create this project for me. So it's just doing it straight in my users folder.
Does you want to clutter your users folder?
No, I don't like going. I'm not the command line type person. So if I open up my command line and that's where it is, that's where I'm working. Okay, so if you want to use Eclipse, you can also do your Maven Eclipse if you want to convert it to Eclipse folder. Oh, one thing talking about this. So for the JPA2 source code demo that we gave, I see it actually uses Glassfish a lot because it deploys all the demos to the servlets. So I lied. You'll need to get Glassfish up and running. If you have any problems with that or struggle, let us know and we'll try and get it sorted. I played around with it a bit. I mean, it's fine. It's quite nice, but it's kind of stupid that they've got this is the access mode for fields, and then they do a whole demo, whole system code just for field access, and they do a whole thing for property access, but the two is exactly the same. All right, so I'm just going to open that Maven project. So it's a Maven. It's going to pretty much select everything and say, yeah, I'll just go. I'm going to do 1.8 because I'm cool. I want to do 1.9. But I haven't tried 1.9 yet.
Yeah, it's never damaged your PC ever.
I installed 1.9 once, and then Eclipse stopped working.
What's the week after the virus?
Okay, see you. Morning, Mr. Kwacha. All right, so I'll zoom in now. So IntelliJ just picks up that I'm using JPAM. Let's put this into presentation mode. Right, so this thing goes and sets up a nice little mini SE project for you. For persistent XML already set up there using your normal Apache database and Eclipse Link to set that up. So cool thing, Eclipse Link, you can do the generation for you. And two little domain objects. One being an employee, there's some details there, and a department, and a little relationship between them. So one department, a lot of employees in there. So it's a nice little starting off point, and it also gives you a little test that you can run. So it's not an actual unit testing, but it's a little main thing which sets up an entity manager for you and goes and creates 2 employees and lists them back for you. So as a starting point, I've sort of found this is quite lacquer.
Can you remember why you can't actually test it? Because you can't link the JUnit lifecycle to the entity manager lifecycle. You actually need a container to manage it.
Okay.
Remember, that's what Delta Spike brought to the table.
Delta Strike.
Delta Spike.
Okay, so like Ray said, you're doing JPA for unit tests. The lifecycles, the entity manager, and the unit tests aren't the same.
You can't link it.
So it probably can be overcome, or he just hasn't tried hard enough.
No, I've tried.
All right, so and if you want to run a test on this, just go and you run Maven compile and just execute that specific little class file. This will then starts up Derby for you, does the deployment of the data source in there. And you can see there number of employees too, listed it for us, and it's all done. So that's quite lacquer. I mean, that's the archetype. It takes like 2 minutes to get set up, and you're good to go. So from a starting point, I mean, if you want to play around with it, and lastly, like I mentioned, doing the coding, this is a nice starting point. You know, you don't have to go and write an entire system to play around with the JPA. Once you've got this set up, you can try the different annotations, see what happens if you try different things, how it works. So that's quite cool. The one thing I just wanted to do here, how do I get to that? I just want to go to my modules. I just want to add a ORM file there as well for later use.
Does that have like a DB viewer? Like
Yeah,
Eclipse does?
it does. I haven't reused it a lot though, but it does have one. So I'm just going to add an ORM there. I don't know what this default JPEG provider does. I just like setting things. Yeah, so you can actually go, you do a search there, just open it up. So database, a little database viewer there as well. You can connect to your stuff. Okay. So that's sort of quickly setting one up. If you're using something like Forge or Spring, you can use that to actually script and set it up for you as well. But if you used Maven before, this makes it a lot easier. Then in the slides, I've just got some extra details about actually setting up, if you want to use Hibernate, what you need to add to your POM file. So I'm not going to go through that. If you want to do MySQL, what dependency you need to add. I've used the latest versions of them, so you can always just go to the Maven repository and just decide which version you want to use. And then on your persistence XML, just the properties you need to change for that. So obviously you need to use a different MySQL database in your in Hibernate just to see which dialect you want to use. So if this is, of course, you're going to stick with Derby, you have to just leave this dialect to Derby. So that's it. I don't know if anybody is happy with that. Cool. All right, so I'd really recommend sort of, as you're going through the book, as you're reading the stuff, after doing a review quiz, if there's any question you struggled with or didn't completely grasp or didn't make sense, set up a quick little application, or just have the application up and running, and go and actually put the code in there, and then just play around and see, okay, well, the review quiz says this is the correct answer, let me see why, and play around with it. That really, I think that's what I usually find helps a lot, getting understanding of how something works. All right, so getting away with our two questions. Our first question is, what's an entity and object? So I've put the textbook answers here, but I doubt they're going to ask this of you in the exam. So you can go and read that if you want to. But the main thing is, what you're going to do is just going back to what an entity is. As you saw last week, an entity is just your lightweight Pojo class. It represents some or other thing out there which has got attributes and relationships. And you can define this by either annotating a class of an identity or via XML, like I said, using your class file or your persistence file, using a class element or your mapping element. So important things is it must have a public, protected, no arguments constructor, and it must be a top-level class. So only abstract or concrete classes, can't be enums or anything like that. So if we go and look at our class, here we go to something like employee. So you can see for this to be defined as entity, we've got our entity attribute at the top there. We can also go and define it in our persistence XML. So in our persistence XML, you can go and define the class there. So you can define as many classes as you want. So I can go and add the department as a class there. And because I'm doing an XML, it'll overwrite whatever it's an annotation. So you can go and do it like that. Or I can go to my mapping file and I can go and add an entity here. And define which class it's going to go to. And I can say, well, this is going to be to my employee class. And so on. So those are the three ways that you can define. And then, of course, if you add another jar file and you point to it, you can also add that as well. The only other thing that if you have to define a primary key for an entity for it to be valid. Otherwise, it's not going to, unless it's part of a hierarchy or something, but it has to have an ID somewhere, primary key somewhere in your entity. Then our second question is, what's the difference between a persistent property and a persistent field? So the one is a field and one is a property. That's pretty much it. What I think they're actually looking at here is when you're defining your entity, you're going to have to define how your state is going to be accessed and persisted via your entity. Is it going to be via your fields or via your properties? And that's what you need to go and define. So when they're saying what's the difference between them, there's no difference really. It's just you're going to need to define which access type you want to use. So the two are field access or property access. So field access means you're going to annotate one of your fields with a JPA annotation. Usually it'll be your ID, or you can use a basic. So the main thing is if you're going to define one of the fields as your ID using an annotation, it means that your entire entity class is going to be using field to set its state. So if you go and look at our employee here, we can see that all our fields here are using the annotations. It means the default access type for this entity is field. And even though we've got getters and setters here, your provider is going to ignore that. It's not even going to worry about using your getters or setters. Important thing is you need to use a protected package or private for your fields. You can make it public. The provider probably won't mind, but that's not good practice. It's bad practice. The other type you can access is via property. So there you need to go and annotate one of your getter methods, not your setter. You need to go and annotate a getter method. And doing that means all your fields are ignored. So whenever it accesses or persists any of your entity state, it's going to ignore your fields. And in an example, there isn't one, but if I go to employee here, I'll need to go and do one of the getter fields. So if I go and get ID, I'll need to actually just go and places and just go and say, well, this is actually my ID field. And remove the other annotations. Setting up this way because I've got one of my getter methods annotated. It means the default access mode for my entity is property. And then, of course, you can have a mixed mode for it. This should be the exception doing a mixed mode. One of the reasons you might want to do it is if you've got some legacy stuff that you might have there, or if you've got some other, if the default was set up as field, but you've got some calculated property you want to set, you can do it that way as well. The main thing is that if you are going to use mixed access mode, you're going to have to tell the class what its default method is. Because you're going to be annotating fields and properties now, there's no way for the provider to go and determine, well, what's my default way of doing it. So for that, you actually need to go and annotate your class. So if we say this department, you want to have mixed mergers, like I've got here. First thing you need to go and do is I have to go and specify the access mode for this. And so I can say the default type is property, or the default type is field, which means that whatever the exception is, I'm going to need to go and define. So if I want to use something like the properties on my default is fields, all the fields are fine. But in this space where I want to use a property, I actually have to go and define, listen here, I want to use property access here.
Is it really take clever enough to actually some kind of error if you compile it?
I didn't check it, but there isn't a set thing in the provider the inspector say what should happen if it's wrong.
So then you chuck it into your container and it's up to your provider, click link or
put a field there.
I put that here too.
It doesn't really care.
That's kind of dangerous.
It is, but like I mean, like sort of the mixed mode should be your exception. It shouldn't be something used a lot. And most of the times, depending on your architecture, you probably want to set your access mode to field anyway. You don't want to necessarily do it on properties. And also, depending on how you set it up, you might just use your entities to get the data out, but not actually use them as detached. Because that can also, with items, that can cause headaches as well. Even though you can do it, I wouldn't. So a lot of times, you'll do your entity, you'll get your entity object back, and you actually just map that to a normal business object which doesn't have any entity stuff on it. So you don't have to worry about detached entities and all that type of stuff. So that's it for the access mode. So it can be field or property. If it's mixed mode, you have to define the default for the entity with the access annotation, and then go and define any of your other fields that you want to do something other than the default as what access type that's going to use. Then, of course, you're going to define your table that your entity links to. By default, it uses the unqualified name of your class. So if you look at the demo here, because you didn't define any table yet, the default name for our table will be department. You go to employee, it'll be employee. But you can go and override that. And there's actually no rules for that. It can be any other table. So if you want to go and override employee and make it something else, damn it. I can just go and annotate this with table. So I want to use a table, and then I can go and give the name of the table. So I can be like, okay, this needs to be EMP, because that's really descriptive. Some databases, of course, you can have different catalogs, different schemas the tables can be in, so you can go and define that as well. You can define a catalog or a schema. I don't think it's going to mind too much if I define both. And some providers, but you need to go and check if you do have a schema or a catalog, you can always go and subscript this with something else. You can go and do. So in some providers, this will work. You don't have to go and define your catalog or schema, not in all of them. I don't know which ones they work and which ones they don't work. Yeah, so for homework for next week, set up a list of which ones they work on or not. In Wikipedia. No, don't worry about that. It's not homework. Really, it's not homework. Don't worry about it. Right, so you can define it as a table, annotation like that, or in your actual ORM class, let's format this. You can go and define your table in here as well. So once again, you give it a name, your catalog, schema, all that type of stuff. So you can go and define it there as well. If you are using just the class from the persistence here, you can't do anything. You can just define which ones are entity classes. You can't do much more with them. So there aren't too many rules around defining the classes. Oops. Then I've got a table. Now I want to look at our columns in that table. So pretty much any built-in Java type can be persisted. So if you look at the list, most of these are, but this isn't the exhaustive list. So any primitive type, the wrapper classes, byte character arrays, large numeric type strings, temporal types, enumerated serial types, anything. So pretty much anything can be put in there, and it's generally up to the providers to decide how the JDBC types map to the Java built-in types. And if it doesn't find a match, how it handles that. So there's nothing in the specification about that. That's up to the provider, so you won't have any questions in the certification exam about if I've got a big int and my provider is an int, how does it handle it? There won't be any questions like that. You might want to know how it does it depending on the provider you normally use, so you could play around with that and see what happens. And also because pretty much anything can be persisted, I don't see them giving you a question asking you, can this field be persisted? It'll be so odd, it'll stand out like a sore thumb if it is wrong. So any entity type, there's an annotation that's at basic annotation, which by default is on any field that you want to persist. So whether you put it there or not, it'll happen at basic. So if you go and look at something like our employee here, it's pretty much like all of these fields, depending on your default type that you're using, it's pretty much like all of these will have an at basic on top of them. So whether you have it here or not, anything that's marked up at basic will go and annotate, will say, listen, I need to be persisted. The only place where this really makes sense is if you look at our mapping, because we want to give any details about the attributes of our entity, we need to do it via the basic element. So if I go and add my attributes here, you can see it defaults to basic. That's the only thing, and then you can actually go and say, well, what's the name of my column? So this, because it's employee, I'm going to link it to my name field. So that's the only place where you can see basic, but if you actually look at annotations, you'll never really see basic unless you're using one of its properties. Then you can also go and override the name of the field in the database that it's pointing to. So by default, it'll use the name of the actual field. So in our employee attribute here, because it's called name, the field in the database will be called name. But if you want to override that, and because somebody long ago, because it always seems like these legacy databases have like ARB names for tables and fields. 1_A_. Because in those days, the field names took up so much space on their 10 meg hard drives.
8.3 format.
So you can go and overwrite the column and say, well, the name of this column is actually NIM, because that's the way they were all back in 1980. So you can go overwrite that. The column, feel there's a few other options as well. So I think for the certification, I don't know if you're going to do any of them later, but you can say if they're insertable, their length, and the column pretty much defines, if you use the column annotation, it actually defines to the physical properties of the column. So it's away from your entity stuff, it's actually the physical properties of the column. But for this one, you just need to know you can overwrite the name. And then in your mapping file, you can do the same thing. Got your column entity there, and you can say, well, the name of this one is NIM. set it up like that. It's not a lot of rules around that. You can put it, if you're using, so whether you're using field access or property access, you'll put your column above one of them. Then there's also the idea of lazy fetching. So that's if you've got some sort of huge type record in there that's maybe got some big blob file in there or some legacy data that you never access anywhere else, but it takes a lot of time to load. You can actually go and set this, listen here, Mr. Provider, when I load this entity, don't go and get all this data on this specific field for me. I'll only access it when I need it later. And
no one has ever gone wrong.
So one thing that I want to say is be careful with this. You'll probably burn your fingers most of the time than actually help. So the only reason to actually do this ever is if you want to get some performance from it. But one thing that I say is from the specification point of view, this is only a hint to the provider. So even if you say, listen, load this field lazy for me, it's a hint. The provider doesn't need to do it. It can decide how it wants to load it or not. Some things, it's a pipe dream, man. It's one of those placebos, like, yeah, I've increased the speed, but it doesn't actually happen. As we can say, the way we do that is actually by using the basic and setting the fetch method there as fetch type lazy. So by default, it'll be eager for all of them. So we can actually go here and say, okay, for our fetch here, it'll be lazy. So my name field is going to be fetched in a lazy manner. Or we can do it on a column field there, and we can say fetch. What's it capital? Fetch, and it's equal to fetch type lazy or eager. Main thing is it's a hint, and you probably want to stay away from it. The other time, and I know with Entity Framework, where this works nice is if you've got a relationship. So you might have your department, you've got a list of employees underneath your department, you can tell Entity Framework not to go and load your list of employees eagerly. You only go and get it when you access it. So I know there it works fine. But there you won't do it on one specific field. Then you've also got large objects. So for your provider, you need to go and define and say, listen, this field isn't a normal field, it's actually a large object. And then you've got two flavors, your binary and your character ones. So blob will be your byte arrays and your serializable objects, and globs will be your character arrays and strings. And the main thing is you just need to go and tell your entity that, listen here, this field is a lob. And because it means that the way it's going to access and persist that data is going to be different from its normal way of doing it. It's probably going to stream it in there. Something doesn't really say what it does. So that's if we've got the field here. Here's the same example, but there's a private string. And it's going to be comments. And in the database, this is actually a blob of application. So in the database, you're storing this as a character array. So you can go and set that up as a log. And then same thing with your specific attribute here. You go and say, well, this specific field is a lob, so even though it isn't, you're just going to say this is a lob, and that's it. So it'll tell the provider, listen here, I'm maxing this field, use your lob magic, and use your other simple persistent type magic. Because that's how ORM works with magic, black magic. Then enumerator types is another way identifying. So in one of the future topics, we're actually going to have a whole topic about enumerator types, but you need to be aware of the annotation for it. So if you've got a enum on an entity, you can go and define, listen here, Mr. Provider, this is an enumerator. And the only reason for doing that is that you can say, listen, when you're persisting the state of this entity or accessing the state of this, either use a string representation of that enum or the ordinal representation of that enum. And one of the warnings, if you're going to persist enum types like this, be aware of future changes. What's the chances of changing this in the future? And if it changes in the future, what are you going to do? So one pointer is don't go and add an enumerator in the middle of the other ones. Add it to the end of the list. Don't go and change enumerators. You're going to mess yourself up a lot. So be careful when doing this. If you do go and change it, you're going to need to update the database. And currently on JPA 2 and even 2.1, you can only persist the string ordinal value. So if you've got an enum, you've got all types of other state on there, like you can with Java, it's not going to persist that. Yeah, so you can have a whole class. It doesn't care about that. It's going to be a string of the ordinal value. So if I go, let's just go and add a little enum here, new class. I've got a little cheat sheet here because I don't want to type all of this out. Employee type. Add this as an employee type there. Then on our employee, you can say, well, I've got a private employee type here, called type. I need to indicate, I think if you don't indicate it, probably just do the ordinal value and test that. But for homework, you guys can go and test that to see what happens. So I can say this is enumerated, and my enumerated type is string. So when I save it, it's going to save the string value or the ID. For best practice, the fact that your provider is going to do this, maybe use a string. It makes the database queries a bit easier if you want to know what's going on there. If your enum type or your value, your string is like a 50-character enum, then maybe not. But for readability in the database, if you've got 1s and 2s and 3s in there, it sometimes makes it difficult for somebody to go and work on that data and say, well, what does a 1 mean again? And you have to go back to the code and say, oh yeah, 1 is...
Your name is a swear word.
Yeah. So try and use a string where possible. I know that when you use a database, you always want to use 1s and 2s and stuff, but there's lots of gigs out there. Use it. Put strings in. Okay, I'm going to check if there's any questions in the meantime. Dave says, yes, Theta can truncate, field cannot, lazy loading. All right, yeah, so Theta can truncate. So yeah, it's on your Theta, I don't know. So that's what Dave says.
I don't understand that. Yeah. Maybe just elaborate.
That was early on, at 7:04. Use case for Theta. Oh, okay. If you want to lazy load something like that, you can do it later on as well. There's use case for the Theta. So the next one is temporal types. And actually, I looked at temporal and was like, how does it get to date? But temporal or tempur is actually the Latin word for time. So that's where temporal comes from.
Why does it sound so fancy?
I know, it sounds very fancy.
Interview question. Find a temporal.
Where does the word temporal come from? So tempor or tempus. That sounds very dated.
Not the same sounding word.
It's not the same sounding word, but both is Latin for time. So temporal means relating to time. So that's where temporal comes from. I just like, why didn't they just call it time types or date types? But because it's got date and time, and then it might confuse the masses. I don't know. But anyway, so for temporal types, you can either use one of the 3 Java SQL types or 2 of the Java util types. And if you're using the SQL types, the provider, that works quite easy. It'll just work. If you're using your Java util types, so you have to go and tell the provider which Java SQL types they relate to. So whether it's date, time, or timestamp, the Java util types is calendar and timestamp, or time,
yeah,
I think. Yeah. So if you are going to use like calendar or time as your temporal type, that's the word for the week. Try and use it. So if you're going to use date or time for your temporal type, like calendar, you have to go and tell the provider which Java SQL type it relates to. So there's no fanciness. So I think the only looking at questions for the certification, they might not set up the temporal type when they're using a util type, and they might be like, is this going to work or not? Is it going to work? I don't know. Once again, more homework for the week. And once again, you can go and define it on there as well. So if we look at our employee here, if we've got a date, no, we don't. We go and say private Linda. This is his date of birth. The fact that I'm using calendar there, not one of the Java SQL types, I have to go and define, I say temporal, and the temporal type for this is date. And then you can do the same one in your mapping as well. You don't have to do it there. So this column is temporal, and it is a date. That's don't forget in the certification, it looks like they asked a lot of questions around the actual ORM mapping in the XML. But they might have a question that just says, defining this, is this going to work? So the certification seems to focus a lot on the annotations, so they seem to be pushing that a bit more, but be aware of the XML mappings. So don't just go into the annotations, that's not what I'm saying, but be aware of the mappings as well. So then of course you've got your transient type, so that's if you've got any field on your entity which shouldn't be persisted, and you can go and mark that as a transient, normal Java transient, or use that transient annotation. So use cases of that would be if you're using some of the mixed mode and you're using a property, but you don't want the backing field for that to be persistent as well, so you go and mark that as transient. Or if you've got some other computed attribute, you can also go and mark that as transient. So listen, I don't want to use that. Then this last one, some additional ones which aren't specifically part of the topic, but you need to be aware of them. It's the order by, order column, and version annotations. So it's not like I got lazy for this, but there might be questions relating to these in the review quiz this weekend. So the main thing is the order by clause is if you've got a relationship, so we've got department, then we've got a list of employees, and we want to order those employees by a specific field. So we say order by the name field and make it ascending or descending. So the default there is ascending anyway. So that's listener. It doesn't matter which field I want to order it by name, or I want to go and order by date of birth, and you're going to go and change the way that gets ordered. The order column, as you can tell from the name, also is for ordering, but that's if you actually want to have a set ordering in that column. So the example I've got there is if you've got a printer key, you've got printer jobs, and you want to keep the printer jobs in a specific order they came in. So we can go and say that it's listener, my print job, when I save it in the database, I'm going to have a print order, and you tell it, listener, when I'm doing the ordering, use this specific column to order it. So it's not a big difference between that. The one thing is just you've actually defined an order column. So when your provider actually goes and persists your print jobs, it's going to use that print order thing to actually.
An application for this that if you have DBAs there who are doing indexing, so like custom indexing to optimize, you want it to rather focus on what they define as your index than what it does.
Yeah. So
that's really the only thing that DBAs do.
It is. So the main thing is for the order column is specific use cases I don't want to go and reorder it in a different way because the user clicked on something. It's like I want to order it actually in the way that it was saved or the way that it got inserted. I'm going to use a specific field for that. Then your at version, and this is a new, there's no Latin to this, it's the versionability of entities. So that's a new one I created last night. I got inspired by looking at temporal. I know it's a new word. So this is and this relates more to locking, and that's if you've got entities and you've got different parts of the application using these entities and inserting and updating, you're actually going to update the version. So if you're changing it, so when you get your entity, you've got version 1. If something goes and changes that entity in the meantime, it'll go change to version 2. So if you want to go and try and update that entity, it'll say, but listen, you were working on version 1, but now I've got version 2. So on there, you're going to say, okay, well, for this, you're going to define the field that you're going to use as the version. And you can say, this is my version field. So when the provider goes and checks, listening, has the version changed of your entity before persisting it, it's going to say, okay, well, it's changed. Or if you want to update it. So it's just the way that works. Then the last one for today, although it's not part of the topic, you need to know about primary keys. This is a part of your entities. So last week, they sorted as well, you have to go and show which is your primary key by using the at ID annotation or the ID element in your mapping. So you want to do that. I think it's actually just part of your attributes. So let's go and say ID clock off. Is it ID? What's in your attributes? So it's in attributes. Yeah. Just going to define which one is your ID. Okay. So you can define it there, or it's defined by your at ID annotation. So by default, the provider assumes that key is insertable, not nullable, and not updatable. You can go and override it, but rather not. So you can go and using your at column annotation, go and override these, but don't do it. So the only rule for your ID is that it needs to be one of these types. it needs to be a byte, int, short, long, or char primitive types, the wrapper classes, a string, a big int, or the Java util date or Java SQL date. Those are the only allowable types for your ID. If you use something else, the provider's going to complain, so you can't go and use something like a float and those sorts of things. So it's specifically defining these types as they are, so what I'm looking for. Ordinal, they can only use specific values. There's no way it can be anything else. Then the other bit around primary key is primary key generation. Because most of the time, if you've got an entity, a lot of entities don't have a natural primary key, so you're going to have to generate a primary key for it. And if you don't want to go and do a select, get the maximum number of the ID, add one to it, put it back in, you can do that, but don't. You can actually ask your provider or the JPA to go and generate that for you. So the way you can do it is on your ID, you go and set your generated value annotation, and you specify strategy. So you're saying, okay, well, I want you to generate the ID for me, and this is where you're going to do it. You can see in our little example, it's already got a generated value there, and by default, it'll use your auto. So the types are auto, table, sequence, and identity. And for table and sequence, you can actually create table and sequence generators, which you can reuse for other entities. So your identity and auto will probably just be for the entity you've got them on, but if you use table or sequence, you can actually define one table generator or one sequence generator and reuse it for all your other entities. And you can define that via annotation or XML. So your auto one is the easiest one. You pretty much tell the provider, listen, I don't care how you're going to generate in your ID for me, using tables, using sequences. Just do it for me, I don't care. And generally it'll return as an integral value or an int. And that's the best practice is, if you're going to use that, is to make the type long so that you don't run out of space. On one project we used an int and we actually ran into problems because primary keys ran past. It ran past it, yeah. So it wasn't fun and games, you can change afterwards. So just start as long. One thing though, one of the catches of using auto is because the provider is going to generate it itself, it means it's going to have to actually go and create either a table or a sequence or some sort of generator on your database, which means the user you're going to use to access with your provider is going to need to have those rights. In production, DBAs might not like that. So generally, if you're going to use auto, don't use it for probably use it if you're going to do some prototyping. So what I'm looking for, prototyping, or some other quick little project. You can probably use auto if you don't care. So for that, you can set your generated value and just go and define your strategy. So on your generated value, you can go and define your generated strategy, and that'll be your generated type will be auto, whichever one it needs to be. You can also go and do this in your XML. So with our ID, I think in the ID there, you can go and say, well, my generated value is strategy is auto, whatever it needs to be. Then you can go and set it up on there. That's auto. Then table is the most portable and flexible one. And the idea behind that is that you've actually got a table with two columns in it. The one is an identifier for the specific ID using, so it'll probably be the name of the entity, and the other column keeps track of what that value is. So if you've got an employee that you want to track, you'll have your first column will say this is my employee ID, so emp ID or something like that. And your second column will be a double or a big int, and it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, and it'll just increase itself as it goes. And the reason it's the most flexible, most portable is it doesn't matter which database you're using, you just have to be able to create a table on there. The one thing though is if you don't define which table to use for your provider, it'll go and try and create that table for you. So once again, you have the same problem where the DBAs might not like that, so you should probably go and define the table up front. And for that, you can then go and define the table generator. So your table generator is actually a way that you can specify a reusable generator. So you can reuse it, you don't have to. And on there, you can then go and define the actual table that you want to use for that, what those columns are, so what your primary key column is, so the name for your generator, and then which one is going to keep track of the values, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5s. And then in your primary key column, you can also go and define, listen here, when you're keeping track of a specific entity's ID, what name to use. If you don't give it a name, the spec doesn't say what the provider is going to use for that name. It could be anything. One of the ways that it gets away, that your provider gets away from actually going and querying this table every time you insert, because that's just going to kill concurrency. It has to go and query this table the whole time with transactionality, all that type of stuff. It actually goes and fetches a block of primary keys for you up front. Spec doesn't say what the defaults for that have to be, but your provider will probably go and fetch 50 or 100 or something at a time. So you actually go and tell it how many to go and fetch at a time as well. So what your provider then go and do is, if once it starts up into match, say, okay, well, I'm just going to go and fetch the first 50 IDs for that and keep them in lock. So actually go and update your table and say, listen, I've gotten the first 50 and reuse them. So the one thing is you need to just understand if whichever provider uses, how it's actually going to do that. So just looking at the table generator here, is if you just say my generated value is generation that table, you're actually telling your provider, listen, you go and you decide how to generate that table, what columns to use, what to call them, and we're going to do that. Or you can go and set up a table generator like here, which you actually give that generator a name, what table to use. Once again here, if you don't set up the table allocation size, just give it a name, the provider will go and generate it itself. Then when you use your generated value, instead of telling it what strategy to use, I could do at the top here, just tell it which generator to use. So because we've given our generator a name there called address gen, you just tell it which name to use at the bottom. So it's quite nifty. Defining this table generator, you can define it anywhere in your persistence unit. Because you're going to reuse it, you can just define it anywhere, and then if you want to use it, just say generator. So you can actually go and add this table generator on top of the class if you want to. It just needs to be somewhere where you can annotate any JPA, you can go and annotate that. And then reuse it wherever else you want in the persistent unit. Sequence is another way of doing it. Not all databases support this. So this is when you actually have a sequence object in your database, and that will go and keep track of what the number is. And for your sequences, it will have a name and all that. Once again, this isn't as portable as the table one, because your database has to support it. You can either go and do your generate value and set the strategy as sequence, and the provider will go and generate that sequence for you. Or you can go and tell it, listen here, I've got a sequence that I've already created on the database for me, and this is the name of it. So you can give it a name. So like the table generator, you can go and overwrite those as well. For a sequence, you can actually go and set your startup values and your by how many it should increment it each time. So default should be 1, but you can say, well, every time I get a sequence, increment it by 100, if that's the way you want to do things. And then the last one is identity. This is also database dependent. SQL Server does it, I know. Oracle does it. And that's if you're actually going to find your primary key as a identity column. And it'll go and generate itself for it. So the problem with that is, like I said, not all databases support it. The other thing is also you'll only get that ID once you insert into the database. So the database record needs to be inserted into the database, and then you'll get your primary key back. So some providers try and get past it by doing an eager insertion of that, but then you've got problems with transactions, concurrency, all that type of thing. So don't use identity unless it's a legacy thing that the database has been set up like that. Try and avoid that, but if it is there, unfortunately, you're going to have to use it. Like I said, the big thing about it needs to be inserted, and you need to be aware of your provider, how it's actually going to handle getting that. It's going to eagerly insert and try and get that, so actually just insert the minimum for that record so it gets your ID for you so you've got it. But then you need to be aware of commit reads and dirty reads and all type of other things. And that's it. So for the ID, I can just sort of show you if you are going to use something like, let's say, table. Yeah, you can go and define your table generator in here, and then you can give it a name. This is my gen. You can define your table that's going to refer to it, your allocation size. So I want to get 1,000 records at a time, all that type of stuff. So all that there, or on your actual class. So like I said, you can go and define that table generator, sequence generator on any other, on top of any other JPA annotations. I can go and say my table generate here. The name is imp using table. You can go and define that table generator anyway, and then just reuse it. So even though I have to find it there, I can go to my department and say, okay, on this, The generator I want you to use is mgen. Even though it's not defined as entity, the fact that I've defined it on employee means it's accessible throughout the entire persistent unit. So the composite primary key, so there is a separate topic for that we'll look at later, so that's why I'm not addressing it now, but yeah, we are going to look at composite primary key and all that type of things later on. Same thing with the order by column. Order column, that forms part of the collections, which is a separate topic as well, so look at that later. All right, so for this week, once again, 10 questions. Should be easier than last week. Reading for following week is on the entity manager, so it's chapter 6. I haven't really double checked to see if the entire chapter 6 is for entity manager, but I'll email you guys once I've updated that. And then the sections is 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, and 7, and the specification. So just keep an eye. I'll send out an email if I do update that. But whenever you start reading, go and look at Moodle for the specific week. So generally try and update these and keep these up to date and sort of say what needs to be, what you need to read and so on. But because this is the first time we're doing this course, we're sort of taking it as it comes and adding things on. All right, so the attendance keyword for this week is API. So uppercase, lowercase, mixed case, shouldn't matter. I didn't check that. Okay, so it could be any case. So it'll be API. Let me see if it is open, because the time on the server is whack. Like last week. Okay. The course is currently not available. I've set it for 5 o'clock. That's what I'm saying, it's completely whack. So I'll just set it to the day before again. Timing. So it should be open now. Attendance quiz. Okay, it's open. All right, so remember to do your attendance quiz. It's the only way that we can show HR that you actually attended the certification. They're not going to go on our words. They stopped trusting Rory long ago. I think they're close to stopping trusting me. So the attendance quiz is the only way that you can prove it. All right, guys. Remember to do the attendance quiz. Good luck for the review quiz this weekend. And if you cannot write on the weekend, please let us know ahead of time so we can open up the quiz rather earlier than later. It's a bit of a mission to do it afterwards. And we'll check the review quiz to make sure there aren't any gotcha questions there, like question 5 from last week. All right, cheers. Keyword is API. The keyword is API. Dave, did you go and get a coffee? I did mention it. All right, cheers, guys. Bye.